So, Eric, let's talk about Mark Mero here, because this is something that I myself had never seen. But Mark wrote a Twitter post and posted two images. He wrote, "I've been asked many times what wrestlers actually make in royalties from the WWE, so let me give you a real example. I left the WWE years ago, and more than 20 years later, in 2019, I came across an old royalty statement. When you look at how much money many wrestlers help generate versus how little they're actually paid, it's honestly hard to believe. On this statement, even after being out of wrestling for over 2 decades, I was still partly responsible for $39,590.81 in revenue. My royalty payment for that, $71.47. That's the reality of a lot of wrestlers. We help build the brand, the characters, and the moments fans still watch today, but the compensation rarely reflects the value that was created." Now, this is from Mark Mero just last night as we're talking here today. And I know that you've been a part of this system for a long time. And I want to talk about how maybe it's changed for the better or the worse, because I don't know what the future royalties of this current crop of superstars are going to look like. I think everyone is delighted that they're all making more money than ever because there's quote unquote guaranteed money. I don't know what the future looks like. But, our buddy Kevin Nash, he's made a king's ransom on NWO merch years after he was finished, sporting NWO merch on TV. Can you talk to us about WWE royalties and what your experience has been like with those?
Happy to. First, a little context. I've never had a royalty deal before. I got one when I first went to WWE in whatever year that was, 2002. 23 years ago. Wow. It's hard to believe. Almost a quarter of a century ago. Yeah. So I had never had a deal like that paid me any kind of royalties on anything. I never got any royalties in WCW for anything, even though I was on camera and there were cards and there were toys and there were video games. I never received a nickel because it was not part of my compensation package. I made all my money in salary and stock options, quite a few of them actually, that paid off very, very well, but I didn't get any royalties. And I'm sympathetic in a way with Mark, but I'm also realistic. I don't know what Mark's guarantee was. Maybe you do. I think he disclosed it not long ago. I just don't remember, a couple of days ago, but I just don't remember what I saw. So I don't want to throw a number out there if I'm wrong. But it was a substantial guarantee. And it came with a $50,000 advance. Actually, that's one of the things that Mark disclosed on social media. Otherwise, I wouldn't have disclosed it. You have to take that into consideration. It's your overall compensation. Now, if Mark Mero was working on a minimum deal that only paid him $1,000 a month, but was able to negotiate a higher percentage of merchandise because he believed in his own marketability and merchandise future from a revenue perspective, I'm sure Mark could have negotiated that with Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon probably would have liked to roll those dice just to see what would happen. I would.
Hey, I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to make sure you have the context. Mark has revealed that contract because he's actually trying to sell it. He's decided as a new phase of life. He recently got married. We want to congratulate him on
I think that's cool, by the way.
Absolutely. He's purging himself of his old memorabilia room. He had like a shrine to his athletic endeavors and his time in the wrestling world. But he's just decided, hey, let's get rid of all this stuff and let's close the chapter and let's move on. And I think that's cool. But one of the things he has is the original offer and contract signed by Linda McMahon. So it is kind of a cool collectible. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people point and say, hey, that may have been the first guaranteed money contract in WWF history. Now, that happened in 1996. You'll be reminded that that's on the heels, of course, of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash leaving the company because they couldn't get a guaranteed contract. They went down to WCW. The NWO was born. Vince thought, maybe I do need to start playing ball here. And he offered a guaranteed contract to Mark Mero for $350,000 with a $50,000 signing bonus. Now, that contract was pretty controversial, even with guys like Mick Foley and Stone Cold Steve Austin, who both wrote about in their books that they held that against Mark Mero because they themselves were not offered that same guaranteed contract. And they were upset with Mark Mero. And later they both admit, boy, that was stupid. I should have been upset with WWE or upset with myself. He negotiated better than me. That's all there was to it. And I think he even had an agent. So Mark was ahead of his time in negotiating and getting a good deal for himself. But in 1996, a $350,000 offer was pretty damn strong money. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, 400 if it was a signing bonus.
Sure, absolutely.
And 350 thereafter. So yes, that, do the math. What is that in today's dollars? I don't know. I'm not going to do the math in my head, but it's
700,000.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yes.
So for me, I would look from my perspective. I just look at that. I still get bonus or royalty checks once a quarter. And sometimes I go, wow, that's great. Let's go out and get a pizza. And sometimes I go, holy smokes, didn't see that one coming. And to me, it's all just gravy. It's just like I forget. I every time I get a quarterly royalty check, I forget that it's coming because I don't think about it. So I guess it all depends on what your expectations are. That's my long-winded way of saying, what were your expectations going into this deal? And if you believed in yourself and you wanted more merchandise money 20 years later, you should have negotiated for it on the front end. But Mark was smart. He wanted the cash. He made the right decision, by the way. But what do you expect? That you're going to be getting on top of that $20,000 royalty checks, $50,000 royalty checks? At some point, you've got to think of it from an operational point of view, too, because the company's got to make money.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, because not only does the company have to make money, but he actually showed page 2, and you could see there was like a breakdown of, hey, you were featured in this DVD or you were featured in that DVD. But if you take a look, some of the things that are listed are like The Rock and, the Owen Hart. And don't get me wrong, some of the things like Monday Night, Volume 2 and Monday Night Wars. Okay, certainly. But respectfully, it's not like they were selling Mark Mero DVDs. Yes, he was featured on the other ones, but I'm just saying, I think that is a differentiator, because I don't pretend to know all the intricacies of how all this works, but I have a feeling that like a guy like Stone Cold, who does have his own DVDs that come out, his royalty is going to look different than.
Well, and there's a formula, and I don't know it. Like I get those same royalty statements to this day, and I don't even look at them. I may look at which category I'm making the most money in just to see if it's changing at all. More curious than anything. But beyond that, I don't look at how much I make off a video or anything like that, because the formula is so complex. I could show up in, a 10 seconds of a 90-minute video on The Rock. Maybe there's a clip of something I did and I'm there with Hogan. Okay, I'm going to get, 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 cents out of that. It shows up, but nobody's buying that video because there's 20 seconds of me in it. I'm just getting paid according to a very complicated formula that I couldn't begin to understand or explain.
I think a lot of people are going to use this talking point in discussion, Eric, to bring up unions in wrestling. And I've heard all the pros and cons, but I don't know that there's necessarily a right or a wrong answer. I mean, I've had private conversations with some tippy top guys in wrestling who say, no chance. I don't want any part of it. I've talked to other guys who say, man, we should have been doing this a long time ago. Do you think if there were union representation for wrestling, that royalties would be a big factor in all that? Because that does feel like that would be near the top of the list to me.
It would be a mess. I hope it never happens. It's one of those things that sounds so wonderful, so fair, so equitable, provides so much security. And I get it. I want those things. I desperately want those things. At this stage in my life, I need those things. I want those things for my family when I'm not here to provide it for them. But I got to go out and work for it. I got to make it happen. Nobody's going to give it to me. And here's what I mean by that. If you first of all, I think I'm only hesitating because I don't want to. Sometimes I exaggerate to make a point and it comes off wrong. I think there's been multiple times in recent wrestling television history. Let's go back to the steroid trial. I think even after, Vince got through that trial, WWE got through that mess, there was a long period of time where they were not making money. They were losing money. They were hemorrhaging money. And if wrestling would have been unionized at that point, Vince would have not, he barely held it together as it was. He would not have been able to hold it together had they been unionized. The expenses would have been too high. It would have been too difficult to manage. That was one time where that union could have likely killed, not by itself, obviously, but it would have really made it difficult or next to impossible for Vince to crawl out of the pit that he was in for a couple of years after the steroid trial. I think that transition right before WWE went public, that could have had a detriment to the business because the numbers wouldn't have been nearly as exciting. The opportunity for WWE to go public would have been mitigated dramatically if they had been unionized because of the expense side of the equation. So it sounds great, but you've got to realize that one of the reasons that professional wrestling has been a staple since the beginning of freaking television time, wrestling has been consistently performing and making money for the people producing it. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but the reason is because it's very inexpensive programming to produce. Very inexpensive compared to scripted, unionized. And it's not just the union, it's the time, the nature of scripted production and the time it takes to do it. But wrestling has always been able to survive even the toughest times because it's, relatively speaking, very inexpensive programming. And I think the minute it becomes expensive programming, just like, you know, your drama series and other unionized product, you run the risk of collapsing under your own weight.
Be interesting to see what changes, if any, are still to come in wrestling with TKO, and it feels like, you know, every day we turn around, there's a new change legislatively or politically. So it's an ever evolving climate, but it is interesting to see a guy like Mark Mero, who's usually so positive and speaks so warm and lovingly about his relationship with wrestling and WWE. I think he feels strongly that he should have been compensated differently. We want to know what you guys think. Should the royalties be revisited? Do you think the WWE does a good job taking care of their legends? Let us know in the comments below right here on YouTube. We would love to be able to hear from you about that. SaveWithConrad.com.
Yeah, I'm Justin Ruffin from Knoxville, Tennessee. What got me to Save with Conrad was the 83 Weeks podcast. I really wasn't thinking about getting rid of any debt. I just wanted to cash out some equity in the house to do remodeling. But I did both, so that was pretty awesome. Worked out great. We redid the foyer, built pantry space, and there's like little odds and ends when I first bought the house that I wanted to take care of, and we were able to take care of it. So, yeah, paid off 2 cars and some credit card debt. So probably all in all, getting $30,000 in that. And then I got some $30,000 more equity out of the house and got still plenty of equity left over. So payment's good. I lowered my interest rate. I'm in a much better spot than I was. Super easy. Everybody was great. Very, very awesome people. Francis and Steve were great to work with. They were awesome. Made it for a very easy, seamless experience. I'd probably say all in all, probably $1,000 a month at least. I'm lowered my interest rate, especially the way the interest rates are right now, which is, that's amazing. I'm Justin Bruckman from Knoxville, Tennessee. I saved over $1,000 with SaveWithConrad.com, and I did a lot of renovations with that money as well.
Lesson number 212, non-equal housing lender. SaveWithConrad.com.